Good evening, everyone. We're going to start with tonight's activity with a short video.
Greetings, fellow global citizens. My name is Dr. Patricia Jenkins, President of the United Nations Association of Australia, New South Wales, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Peace Perspective video, which is part of our special celebrations of the United Nations International Day of Peace. Peace is also central to achieving the UN 2030 Agenda and associated 17 Sustainable Development Goals. These goals were agreed to by leaders of all nations to address the global challenges we face.
One of the most powerful foundations in promoting peace here in Australia and across the world is in the respect for human rights, in recognizing and honoring the dignity and rights of each person as an equal human being. While Australia is by no means perfect, it is, however, committed to the values of inclusion, equality, fairness, equal justice, and freedom for all.
The rule of law is central to international peace and security, political stability, development, economic and social progress, as well as safeguarding fundamental freedoms and human rights.
We can all have different views, we can all come from different places in the world, and we can all look different as well. But in the end, we're born free and equal in dignity and rights, and we are all the same as human beings.
For me, that's a world that builds security without nuclear weapons. They are indiscriminate, abhorrent, and now, thanks to the Nuclear Weapon Ban Treaty, illegal.
The Uluru Statement from the Heart represents an opportunity rarely given to nations, an opportunity to reimagine and remake ourselves and our identity. We must seize this opportunity by giving Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples a voice to Parliament protected in the Constitution. We must strike agreements or treaties amongst First Nations.
As we stare down a global pandemic, but I hope we can use this time to reflect on how we can emerge from a crisis to become a stronger, more compassionate and more peaceful nation. Let's truly be the land of the fair go, because when we strive for equity and justice, we're reaching for peace.
Without equity, there can be no peace, and without peace, we won't, as a society and as a world, be able to muster the collective energy we need to address the really deep challenges, like climate change and providing health for all, that the world currently faces. Peace starts and ends with the commitment to the great call of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to leave no one behind.
Climate action is critical to the pursuit of peace. Australia listened to the scientists when it came to COVID-19, and we must listen to them now when it comes to the climate emergency we're facing. We need to learn from the pandemic experience, transferring lessons of collaboration and support into our response to climate change, adapting our economies and our lives.
The absence of war provides us with unique opportunity to build nations that are prosperous and based on peace.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see so many of you have joined us this evening for this International Day of Peace, UNAA Peace webinar. This evening, we're going to explore the United Nations and how it acts both indirectly and directly to maintain and assist international peace. I'll discuss this for about 45 minutes, interspersed with a couple more videos, and we'll then have some interaction and questions, followed by, for our younger generation, for our future leaders, some breakout rooms to talk about how younger Australians can get involved in assisting peace action. But first, let me acknowledge our national heritage. On behalf of all participants, let me acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. For many of us, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. For me, it is the Dudgeon young people of the New South Wales Central Coast. We note the continuing connection of all Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people to the land, sea, and community where we live, learn, and work. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people represented here today. We congratulate Raising Peace on the organisers as the organisers of this Peace Festival surrounding the International Day of Peace. Our purpose in the UNAA in New South Wales is to inform, inspire, and engage Australians to create a safer, fairer, more sustainable world. So we're very happy that today we are able to assist the festival and contribute to several events. So why am I hosting this seminar? Well, first of all, I am involved as the Vice President of the United Nations Association New South Wales Division. Also, as shown on the slide, I've had the honour to be serving with and leading UN peacekeepers, both in the field and at UN headquarters in New York. Additionally, over the last decade, I've continued to assist UN actions. I've written and spoken about United Nations peacekeeping and supported Australia appropriately acknowledging the service of its military, police, and civilian peacekeepers. I hope, therefore, this evening to be able to share my knowledge and experiences about the actions that the UN takes to support peace. A little on the history. The United Nations was formed in 1945, some 75 years ago now. At the end of World War II, nations were in ruins and the world wanted peace. And representatives of some 50 countries, including Australia, gathered at the United Nations Conference on International Organisations in San Francisco from the 25th of April to the 26th of June, 1945. There they proceeded to draft and then sign the Charter, which included and created the new international organisation, the United Nations, which it was hoped would prevent another world war like the one they just lived through. 4 months later, on the 24th of October 1945, the United Nations officially came into existence when its charter had been ratified by the 5 permanent members, China, France, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, the United States, and a majority of other signatories. The principal home of the United Nations was then built alongside the East River in New York. But there are also many other United Nations offices and missions now established around the world on all our continents. There are 2 important founding documents that guide and work on the United Nations: the United Nations Charter and the International Declaration of Human Rights. The Charter of the United Nations is the founding document. Due to its unique international character and the powers vested in it, the United Nations Charter is considered to be an international treaty and an instrument of international law. All of the now 193 member states of the United Nations are bound by it. It codifies the major principles of international relations, the sovereign equality of states, and the prohibition of force in international relations. The Charter begins with the preamble that commences, "We, the people, determined to save generations succeeding from the scourge of war." As shown, Article 1 of the Charter outlines the purpose and principles of the United Nations. And it's outlined further in the following 110 articles of the UN Charter. The second document is the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. Drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions in the world, the Declaration was proclaimed on the 10th of December 1948 as a common standard of achievements for all people and all nations. It sets out the fundamental human rights to be universally protected and has been translated into more than 500 different languages. It states that all human beings are born with equal and inalienable rights and fundamental freedoms. And it contains some 30 articles which describe the rights and freedoms of all nations, that how they should ensure their global citizens can enjoy. I wonder if in today's environment, we could really get such an agreement signed. The Charter established the principal organs of the United Nations, as is shown here. The General Assembly, the main deliberative, policy and representative organ of the United Nations, in which all 193 members are represented and have an equal vote. Each year in September, actually happening right now, the United Nations holds the annual General Assembly session in New York, which many heads of state generally attend and address. The General Assembly and its subordinate committees make important decisions on peace and security, admission of new members, and budgetary matters. The second important organ is the Security Council, which has 15 members, the 5 permanent members mentioned before, and 10 non-permanent members who are elected for 2 years to represent their various regions. Under the Charter, all member states are obliged to comply with council directions and decisions. It takes a lead in the existence of determining the existence of a threat to peace and aggression, and it calls upon parties in a dispute to settle it by peaceful means and recommends means of adjustment. If necessary, it can resort to imposing sanctions and will deploy a peace operation to assist or even authorize the use of force to maintain and restore international peace and security. The Economic and Social Committee is the principal body for coordination of economic, social, and environmental issues. It's a central mechanism for the activities of the United Nations system and its specialized agencies in the economic, social, and environmental fields. It importantly is behind the sustainable development that we'll talk about in a little while. The Trusteeship Council is now suspended. It looked after the 11 trust territories that existed at the end of the Second World War and that have all now obtained self-government and independence. And the International Court of Justice is the principal judicial organ of the United Nations. It's located in the Netherlands at The Hague, and its aim is to settle, in accordance with international law, legal disputes submitted to it by various member states or by its agencies. And finally, the UN Secretariat is distributed all around the world. It's tens of thousands of internationally UN staff, both recruited internationally from all the countries around the world, and they carry out their work in peacekeeping officers and officers, right around some 36,000 of them at any one time, a huge organization. But the UN system itself is more than just the departments and the UN headquarters in New York. It's a complex international system, which has, in addition to itself, the UN headquarters has got another 35 separate funds, programs, and specialized agencies, each of which have their own area of work, leadership, and importantly, their own budget. Let's look at some of these organizations only, because there are just so many of them. We certainly can't talk about them all today, but some of them are quite important. Obviously, the World Health Organization has been prominent in the last 18 months, and particularly it's been the work it's been trying to do to assist nations all around the world to handle the situation with the pandemic. And it always looks after trying to make sure that the level of health, the best level of health, is happening right around the world. The World Food Programme, winner of the new Nobel Peace Prize in 2020, is the world's largest humanitarian agency. It helps almost 100 million people in almost 88 countries every year to get food and subsistence. The United Nations Development Programme works in nearly 170 countries, helping to eradicate poverty, reduce inequalities, and build resilience. It's often the basis of much of the work that's being done by the UN country teams in various member states. The High Commission for Refugees, of course, has a huge job. I can't go into all that detail now, but with some 26 million refugees and over 46 million internally displaced people around the world, it has a huge job trying to assist in settling people back into their own countries or into other countries. And then there are a bunch of other agencies and organizations which are assisting us every day to carry out what's happening in the world. Things like the International Civil Aviation Organization, which looks after how the world shares its skies. The International Organization for Migration, the UNAA, the UN Institute for Training and Research, the UN Environmental Project, the International Maritime Organization, the World Bank, and of course, organizations such as UN Women, who's trying to make sure that we have equality in gender and women's empowerment. These assist in maintaining peace across the world all the time, working through various agencies and with information systems in many, many countries around the world. Their main work can be done or be summarized up in the Sustainable Development Goals, a good indication of the total processes of the UN. And it's in the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which have been adopted by all member states in 2015. They provide us with a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for the people and the planet, now and into the future. They recognize that international peace can only be assisted by ending poverty and other deprivations, developing strategies that improve health and education, reduce inequality, and spur economic growth, all while tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and our forests. Interestingly, this week, 17th to 26th September, is Global Goals Week. We're going to just look at quickly now at a video which describes those goals and what they're trying to achieve.
We can be.
We must be
the first generation
to end extreme poverty.
The generation
most determined
to fight injustice
and inequalities.
The generation that saves the planet from climate change.
And this is how it will get done.
The global goals.
A 15-year plan
for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
We will live in a world
where nobody,
anywhere,
lives in extreme poverty.
Where no one
goes hungry.
Where no one
wakes in the morning asking if there will be food today.
We will live in a world where no child has to die
of diseases we know how to cure.
And where proper health care
is a lifelong right for us all.
We will live in a world
where everyone goes to school.
And education gives us the knowledge
and skills
for a fulfilling life.
We will live in a world where all girls and all women have equal opportunities
to thrive
and be powerful and safe.
We cannot succeed if half the world is held back.
We will live in a world
where all people can get clean water
and proper toilets
at home, at school, and at work.
We will live in a world where there is sustainable energy for everyone.
Heat, light,
and power for the whole planet.
Without destroying the planet.
We will live in a world where economies prosper.
And new wealth
leads to decent jobs for everyone.
And we will live in a world
where our industry,
our infrastructure, and our
best innovations
are not just used to make money, but to make all our lives better.
We will live in a world
where prejudices and extremes of inequality
are defeated
inside our countries
and between different countries.
Where people live in cities and communities
that are safe, progressive,
and support everyone who lives there.
Where we replace
what we consume. Planet where we put back what we take out of the earth.
We live in a world that is decisively rolling back from climate
change.
Where we restore and protect the life in our oceans and seas.
Where we restore and protect
life on land.
The forests,
animals, the earth itself.
With peace between and inside countries.
Where all governments are open.
And answer to us for what they do at home and abroad.
And the justice rules.
With everyone equal before the law.
Where all countries and we their people
work together
in partnerships of all kinds
to make these goals a reality
for everyone, everywhere.
These are the United Nations global goals
for sustainable development.
Let's get to work.
Let's make it happen.
Okay, this is one here.
Yeah.
So the tickets, they'll send you.
So the Sustainable Development Goals, set by the United Nations and accepted by all countries, and all countries should be having plans to develop each of those Sustainable Development Goals. Let's look a little bit more now at Sustainable Development Goal 16, Peace, Justice and Strong Institutions, and particularly at the way in which the United Nations, through its departments and organisations, particularly directly assist the international peace and security. This is done mainly through two main departments of New York and United Nations headquarters in New York. The first, the Department of Political and Peacekeeping Affairs, which, as it says, engages in a range of preventive diplomacy, mediation, peacekeeping, peace building, electoral assistance, and advancing women, peace and security. In particularly, the preventive diplomacy refers to diplomatic action which is taken to try and prevent disputes from escalating into conflicts and to limit the spread of conflicts when they occur. And the peace building is aimed at activities which assist countries who are emerging from conflict to reduce the risk of them relapsing into conflict and laying the foundation for sustainable peace and development. They have a number of activities involving the Peace Building Commission, a Peace Building Fund, and a Peace Building Support Office. There's a lot of guidance going on there. In addition, the Department of Peace Operations actually, as said there, provides political and executive directives to peace operations all around the world, and it contains and maintains contact with the Security Council, with the contributing troop and police and military troop contributors and the financial contributors, and all the parties to the conflict, the implementation of the United Nations Security Council mandates. Let's look a little bit more now at exactly what those peace operations do. They are collective action, which has been agreed by the international community and aims to stabilise zones of conflict, assist countries emerging from conflict through the deployment of peacekeeping operations. They get their authority from the United Nations, from the United Nations Security Council, either through Chapter 6 of the United Nations Charter for Peaceful Settlement, through Chapter 7 for more intervention, or through Chapter 8, which is working with regional organisations that can get together themselves and assist with the authority of the United Nations to conduct a peace operation in a certain area. They involve contingents from a range of interested countries. 123 of the 193 member states actually now provide military, police and civilian personnel to a range of contingents and activities. They work together. Their action might, as we say there, conflict prevention, management and resolution, peacekeeping and peace building. But they occur in difficult and dangerous environments, often where the situation, the environment is broken down over a decade and things are not working at all from an international point of view or from a national point of view. They need the capabilities to match the mandate and the requirements that the mandate gives them. There are at any one time about 12 to 15 peace operations going on around the peacekeeping operations going on around the world. These are the current 12 that are going on at the moment, and they involve, these are blue beret or blue helmet operations, and they are conducted, as you see, there are a range of operations there, some of them been going a very long time and now basically confidence building missions, and a range of recent missions, integrated type, complicated missions that exist mainly in the Africa and South American areas. They work under Chapter 6, which is peaceful settlement, Chapter 7, as I said, force intervention, and sometimes under Chapter 8 as well. These operations that we're talking about now involve some 70,000 military, some 8,000 police, and come from, as I said before, from 123 member states, supported by about 11 UN civilians, local and international civilians who are out there assisting to run and coordinate these missions. Over the 75 years that the UN's been operating, there's been another 55 missions which have been initiated and closed. In 1 year, these missions cost about $6 to $7 billion US. And this sounds a lot to most of us, but in fact is very little on the international scale. It's less than half the cost of the United Nations, of the New York Police Department or the Singapore Defence Force, and less than a quarter of the Australian Defence Force's budget. The logistics to support these peacekeeping operations is also complex. The UN doesn't have a standing army or a police force. Each year, the UN moves about 150,000 people into and out of these operations, moving them from member states into and setting them up in their missions. They have about over $2 billion and spend annually on acquiring equipment, supplies and services for the field, and using a peacekeeping fleet of over 14,000 vehicles, of 150 to 200 aircraft, naval vessels, and even unattended aerial vehicles. They have hospitals, level 2 hospitals that can carry out surgical capability, and over 300 medical facilities. And the UN equipment that's held there and at the logistic base at Brindisi, it consists of over $2 billion worth of different support equipment, supported also by contingency-owned equipment, which their member states themselves bring in. These peacekeeping operations are complex activities, involve many actors, local, regional, and international, including in some missions, you might find over 200 international and national NGOs in the area as well. As said before, peace operations are seldom peaceful. Some 4,000 peacekeepers have died in the service of peace. There are some principles and success factors that have been developed over the 75 years that the UN's been doing it to make sure that peace operations run as well as possible. These principles are, first of all, consent. It's absolutely critical that, first of all, we get international consent for this peacekeeping operation, and then consent from the area that the peacekeeping operation is being actually undertaken. Consent from the various forces involved, and of course, what we need to do is maintain that consent. Often it's difficult after the UN's been there for a while to ensure that all the parties to the conflict and the international parties are still in consent of that, or giving the consent and level of consent to that peace operation. Peace operations and peacekeeping have a principle of impartiality, not neutrality, but impartiality. Neutrality is the sort of thing that many humanitarian organisations are operating on, the International Committee of the Red Cross, where they treat everybody equally all the time, depending on whatever the conditions are. Impartiality is a set of rules that have been agreed about how that particular activity is going to proceed, and then they apply the rules of that activity fairly to all sides. It's a bit like the referee of a netball team or a netball game or a football game. Make sure that you've got a set of rules of how they've been agreed under the peace operation or the peace or the cessation of hostilities. And if people break those rules, then necessarily a yellow card or a red card can be given to in a sports activity. Here, there may be the need for use of force. And where the basic principle is that there is no use of force or non-use of force, there is the requirement to defend people and to make sure the mandate can be carried out. And for that very reason, many peacekeepers, when they deploy, are armed, both the military and police, some of them, and they may need to carry out some force to make sure that they can actually move around, the freedom of movement around a particular activity, or assist in internally displaced people move back to their areas. That's obviously got to be applied in a very cautious and a very careful way to make sure that it doesn't actually aggravate the situation. There are also a number of success factors that have been grown up around United Nations peace operations. The first one of that is legitimacy. The legitimacy of the mission obviously comes from the authority that comes from the United Nations Security Council mandate, being given to both Security Council and endorsed by the United Nations member states. That legitimacy must need to be maintained. It's got to be maintained. And obviously, if the actions of the peacekeeping force in any way are illegal, individuals such as sexual abuse and or smuggling or something like that goes on, you can lose legitimacy. So it's critical that the leadership of the peace operations ensure that those sort of things don't go on and that the legitimacy of the mission is there. The mission must also be credible. That is, it must be able to do the job that it's actually been given and asked to do under this mandate. If a peacekeeping mission comes in, it can't protect the civilians or it can't actually achieve what was expected of the mission, it loses its credibility. And therefore, one must ensure that the mission plan is always looking at making sure, are we achieving what we've laid down in the mandate? Is the mandate a ceiling? Is the mandate a floor? Are we going to do more, or how are we going to make sure that we move this situation to a peaceful conclusion? And lastly, and certainly not least, is to make sure that local ownership becomes critical to the whole situation. The UN peacekeeping operation will leave. It has to leave sometime. And while other UN agencies and organisations may be there to assist for a longer time, the actual peacekeeping will leave and the local people must take over the control of their own country, make sure that all the various institutions are up and running, the legal situation, human rights, that all those activities are back and working with them. So it's up to the UN mission to make sure that they assist in every way possible to make sure that this local ownership occurs. Let me expand a little bit on some of my own experiences as a UN senior official. I had the honor to lead for 2 years the United Nations Truth Supervision Organization, UNSO, in the Middle East, located in Jerusalem and on its borders. Established in 1948, it's gone through a number of phases in that period. Initially set up when the Israeli-Arab Wars occurred in 1948, we're setting up a number of armistice commissions on each of the borders of the state of Israel. Now things have changed quite a bit in that environment, of course. Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt. It has a peace treaty with Jordan. It still has a state of war, if you like, or non-peace with both Syria and Lebanon. And so what UNSO does these days is it has a set of observation posts and patrols, and it carries out observation on all those borders and reporting any violations or anything that might lead to the peace becoming interrupted in some ways. Those are unarmed observers, unarmed military observers from some 22 countries we had, mainly European, Scandinavian countries, some from South America and Australia and New Zealand also provide observers, military officers to these missions. And normally those officers are between the rank of captain, lieutenant colonel, aged over 25 to about 50. So they come as some experience and they provide a mixture of different nationalities that can monitor the situation on the borders and report back through the chief military observer and through the head of mission back to the United Nations Security Council about what's happening. It's a very interesting mission, and it's now surrounded by, because of the difficulties that have occurred in the Middle East, with 3 other missions. So there's quite a lot of interaction between it and a mission in Lebanon called UNIFIL, United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, between the Disengagement Observer Force, which was located on the Golan Heights from 1973, and also with another non-UN mission called the Multinational Force and Observers, which operates in the Sinai to back up the Camp David Accord between Egypt and Israel when they created their peace. So an interesting mission which I was involved in for 2 years. A lot of interaction between Israel and all those nations around them, all the 4 neighbors there. The second mission, which I've had some experience with as well, is the United Nations mission in Ethiopia, Eritrea. This was a mission that was created after a border war that went on for a couple of years with very large casualties over on the border, of over 70,000 people, almost trench warfare going on there in the period up to June 2000, when the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union, worked with the peacekeeping and peacemaking, and through a couple of hiccups along the way, they eventually got a ceasefire established in June 2000. I had the honor of leading a technical assistance mission in July 2000 to work out exactly what would be the composition of the UN force, how we would set up what was called a temporary security zone for a number of areas that need to be covered near the border so that people could be drawn back and there would be that space available for the negotiation to go on and exactly to decide where the border in those areas was going to be. The technical mission consisted of people from the Standby High Readiness Brigade, an organisation that had been created mainly in the Netherlands and with some support in other Nordic countries. But I also had advice from technical support from police and political affairs. And we worked very closely with the United Nations country teams in both those countries, in Ethiopia and Eritrea, to recognise and recommend what that peacekeeping mission should look like. I went back to that mission in 2004 to do an analysis of how it was going. This is the mission that was actually sent up, some 4,200 people with that 25-kilometre security zone. And it went pretty well, but one of the problems that came up with this mission was that it didn't get a lot of support and continued consent from both Ethiopia and Eritrea, but particularly from Eritrea, who started to require that certain countries were not allowed to be in the peacekeeping mission. They wouldn't give clearance for the air traffic to be able to fly directly between different locations. They were interfering with some of the other stores and equipment that were coming in. And basically, they were not agreeing to the way the process was going. And so in 2008, the United Nations decided that this was not acceptable. There wasn't a peace to keep. There were still actions going on. There was a lot of violations going on, and they voted to terminate that mission and because of the restrictions that had been laid on it. So all peacekeeping missions are not successful. They try and do the job if there's a peace to keep and if they can continue to maintain that consent. That area, of course, now is still very difficult, and most of you would be aware of the atrocities and the concern that's still happening in the Tigray region around the capital of Mekelle and so on. So that just shows you some of the activities that I've been involved in and some of the lessons that, of course, that have come out of peacekeeping. The UN's always trying to develop its capabilities and analysing its effectiveness, and has a range of different reports over the years, the Brahimi report, the high-level panel reports. And one of the activities that it's undergoing at the moment is a program called the Action for Peacekeeping, which aims to mobilise collective support, improve the concept and the support to peacekeeping, enhance the development and accountability of the peacekeepers, and provide safety to their peacekeepers, and develop a more integrated strategic approach to the way that peacekeeping is done. I'm now going to show you a short video talking about the Action for Peacekeeping.
It's because we have this very different dangerous environment that we have to change.
So hopefully that shows you a little bit in that video of how the United Nations and its member states, 150 member states, have signed up to try and follow those 8 developments and procedures to make sure that United Nations peace operations, peacekeeping operations in particular, are more effective and also more safe for member states. So in my experience, there are a number of major things that along those lines which must be done and must be followed up to make sure the peace operations are more effective. The first is preparation of contingents and individuals. When member states sign up to provide a contingent or an individual's military, police, civilian to United Nations missions, they've got to make a decision in their own country about whether that's in their best interest to do so. But they have to send an organisation and individuals that are well prepared, and often that doesn't occur. I used to make the point when I was the military advisor at UN headquarters that what we want is an asset, not a liability. And to be honest, in the past, particularly a decade or so ago, some of the contingents that were arriving were not up to scratch. They had not been well prepared, and they didn't have the logistic and social support from their own country to make sure that they could provide an asset to the force commander and the special representative running the mission. The other critical area is that those contingents and individuals need to clearly understand the use of force dimensions, the non-use of force except under certain circumstances. They need to actually take those police and civilian through a number of training activities to make sure they understand when the rules of engagement apply, when the orders for open fire apply, and when don't they apply, so that there isn't a problem of an escalation when not necessary, but that there is the use of force to make sure that they can protect civilians, an important area that now is critical in many UN missions. The protection of civilians, of course, is principally the role of a nation state. But if the nation is unwilling or unable to do it in certain areas in their country, then it may be the requirement of the United Nations to protect those civilians. And if they do so, the military police and the police and the military and other elements need to be trained to actually, how are they going to protect those civilians when they start to come to them? What actions are they going to take to prevent actions against civilians, and also what happens when that does happen, when people come to their camps and so on. And to do all these things, you've got to understand the command authority that is various elements are placed under the United Nations, under the Blue Beret. What command authority does the force commander have? What do the contingent commanders have? And what is the leadership at all levels? It's very absolutely critical that in any peacekeeping operation, that the senior management team, the special representative and the deputy special representatives who are involved in the force commander, the police commissioner, and the chief of mission support are all working to the one sheet of music. They have a plan, they review it, they continually get feedback on it, and they, of course, have to report to the United Nations Security Council about it. But that leadership has got to be not just at the top, it's got to go right down through the whole mission area to the lowest elements that they're carrying out the correct leadership. And they've got to be able to do the same sort of leadership they would do in their own country, do it properly in an integrated area. And of course, if they understand those principles of consent, impartiality, and non-use of force except under certain circumstances, and the success factors of making sure that local ownership's done, the legitimacy of the mission is maintained, and that the legitimacy and the authority of the mission is maintained, that's really critical at all the times. In addition to the peacekeeping missions, there are, of course, working under the Department of Political and Peacekeeping Affairs, a range of other missions that are also out there working in a whole range of countries, trying to doing preventative diplomacy, or in the peace building mode, having been a conflict there that might be coming out of conflict. And these are some of the areas that are there now. They might be quite small missions of only a few people, up to 30. Sometimes they work very closely with the United Nations country team. The UN country team is an amalgamation of the various agencies and organizations, humanitarian and assistance, normally run by the United Nations Development Programme, but could be involving the High Commission for Human Rights, the UNHCR, could also have the World Food Programme involved, and all these elements are working with these political and peacekeeping buildings to try and, as I say, prevent a conflict from escalating or becoming that they'll have to put in a peace operation, or that the peace operation is closing down and peace building and stability wants to continue to be maintained in the country. They're headed by a senior representative, ambassadorial level, who has a lot of experience in that area. And in addition to these sort of direct missions, there are also a whole range of other envoys out there at any one time, reporting back to the Security Council, which meets every day virtually, 365 days a year, getting reports from these DPPA missions and the Department of Peace Operations missions about what is happening in the area and deciding how they might be able to amend or assist and support an improvement in the actions that the UN is taking to support international peace and security. One example of these sort of political missions is UNAA. This is the current mission, the United Nations Integrated Transition Mission, Assistance Mission in Sudan. And it demonstrates how the Department of Police Operations and the DPPA work together and interconnect. It was established in June of last year under Resolution 2524, and its mandate is basically spanning the whole of the country of Sudan. It's been a troubled area, Sudan, as many of you would know, over many years, both the conflicts in Darfur in particular on the western side of the country, and of course in southern Sudan, where we've created the youngest country in the world, South Sudan, but then again, it has had its own internal problems, and there's been a United Nations mission down there as well. So that's really how the various elements of DPO and the DPPA are working to support and sustain at any one time international peace and security. So I'd like to just finish up with a quick discussion of Australia's engagement with peacekeeping and peace building, and perhaps how we might slightly improve that. Australia really is a very active and strong supporter of the United Nations. We have a very supportive permanent mission in New York with some 25 plus Australian-based staff from DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, supported by some local staff. And we, the current ambassador is Ambassador Mitch Fifield. And we have also UN peacekeeping UN and Australian consuls in a range of other UN offices around the world as well. Australia is about the 12th largest contributor to the UN regular and peacekeeping budget. We in fact employed the very first peacekeepers that were deployed, UN military observers that were deployed on peace operations back in 1947 in assisting in Indonesia, even prior to the very first mission that was authorized by the General Assembly, that UNSO mission that I talked about before. So we've been actively involved in peace operations for over 70 years. We've provided military and police personnel to some 62 United Nations and other activities since 1947. And today we've got peacekeepers in the Middle East, in UNSO, in the MFO, in Sinai, and in South Sudan. And we played a leading role in missions in the Solomon Islands, in Timor-Leste, in Bougainville, and instrumental in the diplomacy, of course, that led up to the Cambodian peace settlement, and also contributed to missions in Zimbabwe and Australia. So we've also agreed and promised that we will support as much as possible with some short range and short notice to move activities and capacity to move with transport with use of some of the Air Force assets as well. We built a Australian peacekeeping memorial in Canberra to commemorate the service of all Australian peacekeepers, past, present and future, military, police and civilian. And I do recommend that when you get a chance to get to Canberra after this lockdown is over, hopefully you might visit all the memorials that are there on Anzac Parade about the campaigns and the sacrifices that Australians have made. But it's very important, I think, that we also recognise that the last one, as you come down the parade, is the Australian Peacekeeping Memorial, indicating that this is what we're going to be doing in the future, have been doing in the past, present, future, and that we've actually been involved in more conflicts as peacekeepers than combatants. Some 62 missions are outlined on the memorial beam at the back of that peacekeeping memorial. So what then about Australia's actual commitment? If you have a look at the slides on the left there, you'll see that there are several very large commitments by many countries to peacekeeping. Australia's commitment to UN peacekeeping at the moment is only in the order of 60 or 70 people. Whereas these countries, some of them, these countries have got thousands of people involved in peacekeeping. Of course, these countries are also countries with large populations and large defence forces. And in many ways, they also may be gaining some payback by the deployment of those peace operations, those peacekeeping forces, by the funds that the United Nations pays. But I think I have a feeling that we need to actually contribute more. We need to give greater priority and value to people going on UN operations, appointments like I had, and at all the levels right throughout the operations, both in New York and on peace operations. We have very highly trained and specialised people in Australia who can go and add value to these peace operations by filling key appointments and critical capabilities. We have capabilities such as, of course, our Air Force, our aviation assets, our engineer assets. Some of these are very critical capabilities that are hard to get from other member states, medical and other specialist activities. And I believe we should be prepared to deploy those whenever they're necessary in peacekeeping operations. And I really do think we need to maintain a much higher basic level of commitment to the United Nations that broadly corresponds with the average of other troop contributing nations. As a nation which is prosperous and relatively peaceful and has a very well-trained defence and police capability, we should be contributing many more than we are doing at the moment on a permanent basis. Certainly we respond quite often to particular requirements that are requested of us. But I believe that if we were going to have capabilities that were equal to maybe 50% of what other people do, we would be having some 300 people permanently on peace operations. If we wanted to be up there around the level of our GDP, being 12th or 13th richest country in the world, then we perhaps would be deploying up to 1,000 people permanently on peace operations to assist the United Nations peacekeeping forces. So what I've tried to do today is give you a bit of a background to what the United Nations is all about, how it assists both indirectly through its many organisations, agencies, programs, and so on, and to how it also assists in a direct way through peace operations, through peacekeeping, and also the work that both DPO and DPPA does with international peace operations, peacekeeping groups coming from contingents around the world and from their own United Nations and civil servants and local employed staff, continually working to try and maintain and improve the situation for peace around the world. So how can you get involved? Some links here that so you can join us at the United Nations Association or a range of other organisations that have been mentioned during this Raising Peace Festival. And of course, you could undertake our diploma, which tell you more about what the United Nations does. So I'm going to now actually move to a question period and let you identify some of the points that you want to follow up. And I'm going to break from sharing the screen so that I can answer you directly on that. Just a moment.
All right, thank you so much, Tim. I've picked a few questions from the chat for you. So let me just get them up. The first one is from Penelope, who asks, what is Australia's and Doc Evatt's role in setting up the UN and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
Well, that's absolutely right. Doc Evatt was very involved. He was the first president of the United Nations General Assembly, and he was very involved. Australia was quite involved in the negotiations that went on in setting up the UN Charter itself. And he, as I understand the foreign minister at the time was very involved in a lot of those activities. And Australia continues to be very involved in the policy side of the United Nations. Our permanent mission in New York is very active in all the committees and is continually trying to improve the way that the United Nations is operating. So we've always had that interest, and I've got no criticism of the way we work at all. I just believe we could make a greater commitment to some of the actual deployments.
Thanks, Tim. The next question is from Benzian, who asks, could the UN peacekeepers be used in the situation in Afghanistan?
Well, of course they could if there was a peace to keep, Benzian. That's always the problem with peacekeepers. I mean, there needs to be a peace to keep. There needs to be consent, the agreement that this peacekeeping force can come in. And in situations like in Syria and in Afghanistan, where there really isn't a peace to keep, then you can't really put a peacekeeping force in there. But member states are not going to be prepared to commit troops to a activity under blue berets that they do not understand that it's safe for them, and that there is a real program to go from some sort of cessation of hostilities through to a stable peace. So when that situation does evolve, then it's good that the United Nations plans, and it will already be planning possibilities as it does all the time, then it would get the support through the Security Council to actually deploy some sort of peace operation. So hopefully one day, yes. And meanwhile, of course, the United Nations is involved in Afghanistan. It'll have a UN country team there. Of course, the UNHCR are involved. The World Food Programme is going to obviously be deeply involved. There are a number of envoys there, and that country team will be analysing the situation and reporting back to the Security Council. And as soon as there is some sort of agreement that would allow a peace to keep, then of course the United Nations will be trying to get in there. Thank you.
Absolutely. The next one is from Frank, which is, what is the relationship between peacekeeping and peace building?
Okay, well, peacekeeping is the response to a mandate that the United Nations has agreed at the Security Council, that there's a need to deploy a force, a peacekeeping force, which comprises our military, police and civilians, who are going to work with the country team and try and move that country from a weak peace, if you like, the cessation, peace agreement, through to a stable peace. And during that period, of course, peace building will be developing as well. The idea of actually building up the institutions in that country and continuing that on. That will continue even after the peace operation may have been withdrawn. There's still the country team will continue to try and provide assistance in making sure that the peace becomes more stable, activities and institutions are re-established, and the country really owns its own future. So it's a transition period. The peace building starts really from the moment the peacekeeping force goes in, but it builds up and continues right on for maybe decades later.
Great answer. Next, Jayanti asks, since some conflicts are faith-based, how are peacekeepers chosen? Is there a perceived conflict of interest if they follow a particular faith?
Not normally. I think you said faith-based. Obviously, the background to a nation and its contribution has to be considered. Often in a peace operation, neighbouring countries are not included in the peace operation because of the fact they may be affected by the peace situation or the conflict that's going on the borders. So not normally neighbouring countries. Trying to get a good balance of international as opposed to a regional arrangement where, of course, most of the forces are coming from the local region under a Chapter 8 organisation. Under a UN mandate, you're trying to get a good cross-section of international community so that you get a recognition and support from a range of different countries. Normally, there is not a faith activity, a problem with that. That's not taken into account, but obviously it would take it in account in the background. But if the country is prepared to accept a peacekeeping operation, they really should be able to prepare what the United Nations is going to prepare for them. We do, the United Nations, of course, will be checking with countries to make sure that they're well prepared and that they don't provide a difficulty by coming into the mission.
Thank you. Josh's question is, what do you think the future role is for the UN in the face of ever-changing global threats to peace and security? Do you think the world will embrace the UN in the way it once did?
Oh, well, that's, I guess that's the hard question, isn't it, Josh? Well, there's no doubt that the United Nations is continually analysing itself and looking at how it can do its job in a more appropriate manner. We saw that action for peacekeeping, for example. There's been every 5 years or so, there tends to be some sort of major review, like the Brahimi review or the High Panel review, which looks at what has happened over the period. How is the environment changing? Is the UN becoming more of a target? How are the EU country teams working? Continual update. There is a best practices organisation within the Department of Peace Operations, continually looking at different aspects of missions to make sure that they lessons from one mission is incorporated in another. So the UN must change as the member states wish it to change. The argument about the permanent five and which other countries should be represented perhaps more permanently in the Security Council has been around for a long time, but it's not a perfect system. There's no doubt about that. But continually trying to improve it, and it's up to the member states to work with, particularly the permanent five, and make sure it continues to improve in the best way to provide international peace and security. I mean, all those agencies and programs are working around the world all the time. Without those basic controls, we would have many more difficulties around the world. So they must continue. International Civil Aviation Organization, the Maritime Organization, the World Health Organization, all those organizations, the World Bank, they're all there trying to make sure that international cooperation and a rules-based order is available.
Thank you. So we might just have one last question, which is from Chris, and that is, what is the current involvement of the US, UK, France, and Russia in peacekeeping activities?
Okay, well, I mean, in the past, particularly in the time coming up to the Cold War, that the permanent five, if you like, weren't very involved in peacekeeping. They tended not to be involved. They're, of course, making a major contribution within the Security Council, but they tended not to be involved with large contingents. Recently, more recently, particularly in particular missions, those countries have committed it. China has quite a large commitment in the military, in the medical side. Countries like the United Kingdom, the United States have tended to be more involved in activities surrounding the UN peace operations. But yes, each of those permanent five do have contingents that come into various peace operations.
Great, thank you so much for that Q&A and the presentation. I think we'll now pass to Abigail Kaplan. She's a member of the Peace and Security team at UNAA NSW to introduce the activity we're going to do. And Tim, you might like to share your screen again. So that
yeah, I need to do that. Just a sec. I'll move it on. Doesn't seem to want to move on. Why not? Okay, we'll try down here. Here we go.
All right. Well, thank you, Tim, for that fantastic presentation. Very, very enjoyable. Hi, everyone. My name is Abigail, and I'm going to now discuss the interactive activity portion of this event. Basically, we will be doing what's called a Padlet, which is a discussion profile or program, discussing this question in particular. How can young people contribute to the United Nations and its role to maintain international peace and security? Basically, everybody will be assigned to breakout rooms, and you have the options of adding notes to the Padlet discussion board on your own, or we as the facilitators can actually bring up our screen and you can bring questions to the table and we can do it for you. Our facilitators for this evening are Carl, Mukul, Ai Ming, Hannah, Fergus, and Thomas, and also myself. And after 15 minutes, we'll head back to the main session to discuss what we have discussed in these breakout rooms. Are there any questions? No? Awesome. So let's get into it.